Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, folks. This is Ken Kabula from the Better Investing Mid-Michigan chapter. Don't panic. We're not starting the program yet. This is what we call our chat session. We always start chatting 10, 15 minutes before a class begins. Now's a great time to ask questions. Now's a great time to test your audio equipment. If you think you might like it, ask a question later on. Now's a great time to make a comment or just say hi to us if you'd like to. If you're too shy to actually speak on mic, or if you don't have a mic, of course you can use the questions box. And I have some wonderful people and wonderful friends in the back room that are going to try to keep up with the questions during this session. Mark Robertson, my buddy from Rochester, is going to be in the back room, as well as Marty Eckerly from the OKI chapter and Herb Lemcole from the Mid-Michigan chapter. They're both going to be back there and trying to answer your questions, and those that they can't answer or those that they think might be a good question for the entire audience, they'll transmit right to the front desk here, where we can talk about them in real time right on the program. During the program, if you have a question, raise your hand. If you'd like to speak to us, we'll try to get to you. I can't guarantee we'll answer every single question, but I will tell you that we'll try to stay on for a reasonable amount of time at the end of the program to answer as many questions as we possibly can. We had a nice audience for our first session. We had, I was hoping for a group of 30 to 40 that we could really kind of have a seminar with, but we ended up with over 100 registrations, and we ended up with about 60, 65 people at the class. So we're probably going to have a class about that same size now. I know most of you are from Mid-Michigan, and welcome. If you're in a club and you haven't seen somebody from the chapter in a long time, it'd be great to visit your club either virtually or in person. All you have to do is get in touch with me, and we'll try to set something up within the next, 6 to 12 months or so. Especially if you're a new club or if you're a club with a lot of beginners. I particularly love to visit clubs like that and just listen to the questions that are being asked and try to help them take the next step. So think about it. If you're not the decider for your club, take that message to your president or your education vice president or whoever plans programs and suggest that they give the Mid-Michigan chapter a phone call or drop us an email and set up a visit in the next the next fiscal year, the next year. We'll be glad to get that done. My wife and I travel all over the state visiting clubs and kind of tie it to vacations that we take and tie it to weekend trips, things like that. We enjoy doing it. It's very nice to meet you folks. That's the one thing that Mark and I miss more than anything else in the last 4 or 5 years, and that's getting out into the field and meeting all of you face to face. We've become so inured to this virtual stuff that attracting an audience face to face is becoming more and more difficult.
We need a balance. We need a balance, Ken.
Yeah, we certainly do. And I understand that there's expenses attached when you have to come up with a venue and all that kind of stuff, but it's still so rewarding for us, and we think for the students too when we talk face to face. Maybe that's just a really old baby boomer talking, but I think that we've lost something in human back and forth in the last 20 years.
You know what I really miss, Ken?
Well, I don't know if I want to ask what, but I will ask, what do you really miss, Mark?
That we don't have that trip to Punxsutawney yet in our memories.
But it would be interesting to see if you guys updated your photos.
Well,
yeah, because go ahead, Ken.
we're going to be traveling to the Greensboro, North Carolina area next weekend, and Mark has promised we will take some newer pictures. I don't look quite like this anymore. I've slimmed down quite a bit, and so we'll get some new pictures up there for you all to to throw darts at and to do whatever you need to do.
Ken is like minus 50 and I'm plus 5, so that's not a good outcome.
I'd like to welcome the people from my own investment clubs that are here right now. I really am very pleased to have folks from the clubs that I'm involved with in mid-Michigan take advantage of some of the education we do. I think you'll find this a rewarding session, and even if you're an experienced investor, like a couple of you that are on the list already, I think maybe we can give you a tip or a trick that you haven't thought about before. Remember, however, that this class is aimed primarily at folks that are just beginning the investing journey and that are a little bit uncertain about the use of our tools and some of the supporting material that goes with them. It's a great time, folks, to raise your hand and just say hi or just to talk. Tell us about the weather if you want to. But we do have about 6 minutes before we actually begin the presentation. If you have a question about the technology or anything like that, now is a great time to ask about it, person to person, face to face, as it is. Beginners groups tend to be a little bit more shy about doing that than more experienced groups do. So
72 and sunny down here in Florida.
Oh, we don't even want to hear it, Herb, okay?
Go dunk your head in the pool, Herb. Come on.
It might get to 40 today. I don't know. Maybe.
It looks warmer than that out there. I think it's a trap.
It's a beautiful looking day, but I know that if I walk out the front door, it's going to be cold. So,
well, northern Michigan's getting another snowstorm, so they've had over 140 inches of snow so far.
Yikes!
We've had a snowy winter too, but nothing near that. So,
well, my maple tree has buds on it, so I hope it doesn't freeze in snow.
Uh-oh.
I don't even want to get my snowplow bill for my commercial building this month.
That's Herb Lemkel that you're hearing, folks. Herb is from, spends half his time in Traverse City, beautiful Traverse City, and then spends half his time down in Florida. And Herb's been a longtime director of the Michigan chapter, former president of the Northern Michigan chapter, and then when Northern Michigan and Mid-Michigan merged with each other, he became a director on the Mid-Michigan board and has served for many, many years. He's a mover and shaker in one of our model clubs located in the northern part of our chapter. We have 6 model clubs in mid-Michigan, and we're proud of them, very proud of the work they do in educating. 6 good-sized model clubs, so we're very proud to brag about that just a little bit. We also have in the back room Marty Eckerly, who is a very active member of the OKI chapter. That's down in the Cincinnati area. O for Ohio, K for Kentucky, I for Indiana. And they occupy the geography in that kind of triangular area where the 3 states meet. Marty's been a director for almost as long as I've been involved in better investing. I can remember way back when I was the region manager for that region, and Marty was an active director at that time. Good morning, Marty. How are you?
He may have stepped away.
There he is. There
I am. I don't know, my audio on my speaking audio just goes out occasionally. I'm not sure what's happening. But
okay.
Yeah, thank you for having me here to help things out. I'm glad to be able to do so. And welcome to Michelle from my chapter that is here. So glad to see her here.
We lost a helper at the last minute. She got called away in a family emergency, and so I was so happy. I was telling folks about it at a bull session we had, and Marty just out of the blue said, "Well, I'll help if you need it." And that's the way I find that the better investing volunteers are throughout the country. They're willing to step in and lend a hand if you need some help. So a tip of the hat to our OKI friends, and and our friends throughout the country, because when we do our bull sessions and our roundtables, we get help from throughout the country, from coast to coast. They're willing to step in and lend a hand when we're doing a program that they feel is valuable for the membership. And talking to novice investors, beginning investors just starting out is certainly one of those kind of programs.
Mark,
to Mark and Ken for putting this on so graciously all the time. They do a great job.
Ken, we have questions. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. Great information.
I just was going to respond to Daniel Herb. Okay, he wants to know if investing $1,000 is something that you need to do with every stock you start in. And Daniel, we're going to talk about that in the third class, about how you might begin a portfolio at a much lower level, and play with it in today's world with today's discount brokers. You can play with dollar amounts as low as $5 to put into a stock and buy a fractional share. So we're going to talk about how you might put together a portfolio for, call it practice, if you will, for not a whole lot of money, and then kind of build that into an actual portfolio as you gain experience.
Ken, so we're going to talk about Buttonwood this afternoon, right?
Not very much, but a little bit, Mark. Yes.
Because that's $100 a month.
Yeah.
Ken, I think it's also important to note that the model investment clubs always encourage and welcome guests. Our Port of Value Investment Club will meet Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock online. We're always willing to accept guests, and I'm sure you are down there in your wolves and everything else. And it really shows you how a club ought to be operating. And I recommend that you do that just to get the idea of what how a club should operate.
Yeah, how I like to place it, Herb, is that you see a real club in real operation, and you see it warts and all, because even model clubs sometimes have issues and sometimes make some errors, and they try their best to rectify those errors and to stick with what a true investment club should be doing. We have our longtime past president of the Mid-Michigan Model Club with us today, just acknowledging Mary Reynolds. Mary, I'm so happy to see you on the list. I hope you don't have too much to learn from this class, Mary, but it'll be a nice review if nothing else. Mary was the president of the Mid-Michigan Model Club for, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years. So we're so happy, and she's now a director on the chapter board. And it's 12 o'clock, so I'm going to go silent for 5 or 6 seconds and then begin the class. Folks, this is Getting Started 2025, Tools and Portfolios. I'm Ken Kavula from the Mid-Michigan chapter, and I'm joined here by my good friend, my speaking partner, my rock when it comes to asking for help on a lot of things, and the president of Manifest Investing, Mark Robertson. Mark's also a director on the Mid-Michigan Board of Directors, and the two of us have found that our talks together throughout the country are popular. We found out that we enjoy driving to and fro and spending the time in the car discussing all the problems of the world, solving most of them, and then promptly forgetting what we said when we get home again.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to do it again.
Yep. We're going to be in Greensboro, North Carolina, in that
area. Actually, Raleigh.
Weekend. I'm sorry, we're going to be in Raleigh next weekend. I said Greensboro, I'm going to be in September in Greensboro. We're going to be in Raleigh this weekend, and if you're anywhere near the area, we'd love to have you stop in. It's a program sponsored by AAII, that's the American Association of Individual Investors, but I know there's going to be a lot of better investing members at this program as well. So if you need information, drop me an email, drop Mark an email, okay? This program this afternoon is the second in a 3-part series, and we're talking to true novice investors. We're talking to those of you that have just begun the journey and are having some issues or a little bit confused on using some of our tools. We spent the first class talking about the the core SSG, how valuable it is to a beginning investor, and how it can lead you step by step by step by step through the to get a good number for total return at the end of all the work. We're going to look at transitioning from the core SSG to the SSG Plus. Everything we talk about today are for educational purposes. We will talk about some real stocks. We'll be showing some portfolios, not in this class, but in the next class. If we own something, we'll try to disclose that as we move forward. If you'd like a copy of the slide deck, email Mark R at manifestinvesting.com or kcabula1@comcast.net. We'll be glad to send you the slides from the presentation. We'll be posting the presentation along with the accompanying dialogue on our YouTube channel. And to get to our YouTube channel, try searching for Better Investing Roundtable or Manifest Investing Roundtable, and that'll take you to our channel. It contains about 15 years of programs that Mark and I have been doing throughout the country, and we think they're filled with some nuggets that are really pretty decent. When you go there, if you've never subscribed, please subscribe to our channel. Every subscriber gives us a little bit more things we can use to make the channel even better. So YouTube channel, this one will be posted, we hope tomorrow or the next day. So give us a little chance to get it up there on the channel, and then you can look at it at your content. Or again, if you want the slides, or if you have questions, send us emails right there. We'll be taking a look at those emails and trying to get an answer to you. Here's biographies for Mark and for myself. We're not going to read them to you, but rest assured we've been involved with this investing journey now for 25, 30 years each, and we both feel we have a pretty good handle on helping beginners take the first steps along the way to creating a nest egg that is significant and will make their final 20 years of life maybe really, really worthwhile, because you won't worry so much about your finances. The disclosure about manifest investing is here. Occam was right. If it's simple, it's probably the correct answer. That's Occam's razor. And he was right. Manifest Investing is a paid site, but it's a simple site to use, and it's a great site to get information to help you validate your stock selection guides and even help you create your stock selection guides. So take a look at it. You can get a free 90-day trial just by giving your email address. So look for the trial and see if you might want to use Manifest to help you validate what you're doing in Better Investing. Now, at the end of our first class, we created a stock selection guide for Zoetis. The one thing that we didn't do in that stock selection guide, and again, if you weren't in the first class, let me point out that we're using the core SSG. Up here at the top, whichever one has a green background is the active tool, and in this screenshot, core is the active tool. I'm on showing the first tab with the first step, and the one thing that we neglected to do at the very end of creating the Zoetis SSG was to save it. If this orange button is here, then you haven't saved the SSG yet. So the final step would be to click it. And once you click it, it will default to a generic name. And the generic name is always stock ticker space and the date that you created the SSG on. That date will not change in the name. That'll stay there in the name unless you choose to change it. And the name can always be changed. I always choose to add more information. If you notice, you have a lot of room where you can type extra information. And I always like to add more information because there's many times I'm doing 2 or 3 or 4 different studies on the same particular stock, and I like to differentiate them. So on this one, I added to the generic, I added for getting started 2 core SSG, and then I put the ticker again at the end. It's a long name, but it will definitely differentiate it when I look at it 6 months from now or even 3 years from now. I got to this screen by doing quick navigation, and I'm going to search the saved studies, and I have that study saved now so that I can open it. So here I am opening that study that we did at the end of class 1. And you can see, I know that it says for getting started 2, so I know it's the same one we did there. I'm still in the core tool, okay? Now, once you have it in the core, and as a beginner, I would urge you to do your first 15 or 20 SSGs in the core. Use it, step through the process, one small step at a time, and begin to understand the logic behind the guide itself. Once you do that, you can create an SSG, and then you can immediately move your judgments from the core to the plus by just clicking a single button. So here I am in the core. And here I am, I've now changed from core to plus. Notice that plus has a green background. And I have a completely different looking first page. Now notice, I still have tabs across the front, across the top. What is intimidating about the SSG Plus is there are lots of tabs and there are no real steps attached to each tab. As a beginner, I would urge you to only focus on tab 1 and tab 2. As you gain experience, you can gradually add the information from other tabs. You can use it in your analysis. You can use it to make some minor decisions about your stock. But in the beginning, focus just on the first tab, Analyze Growth and Quality, and on the second tab, Valuation and Return. There's no steps, so you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm going to do? Well, we know that we're going to look at the tabs. So what am I supposed to do on the Analyze Growth and Quality tab? Well, we've seen this graph before, but we've seen it without these extension dots. Let's examine the right side of the capture. And I will tell you that there's more on tab 1 than just this. This tab extends beyond this dark blue line, but for the moment, we're just looking at the top. The extension dots are new, and this side looks a lot different. Notice that we can project from a certain place, either the last piece of annual data, which would be these blue dots right here, the last quarter, which, because we're at the end of the fiscal year, the last quarter matches the last annual data, or we could also project from the end of the trend line. For sales, that trend line is awfully close to that dot. For earnings, that trend line is a little bit above the dot. It defaults to quarter, and I would suggest that 95% or more of the time, you're going to want to stick with the default. Here's the most recent quarter, and we saw that on the SSG core, so that's not new. Here are the estimates coming from Morningstar, and instead of appearing on 2 different slides, they're now on the one slide right next to each other. So Morningstar, which provides us our data, is giving us a 2-year future estimate for sales and a 5-year future estimate for earnings. We saw this data before. It's not new. It was in the core, and it's not a better investing number. It's a number supplied to us by Morningstar. We also see a legend, and that's a little bit new. Let's look at the legend, because by clicking on some of the other choices, you can add more lines to your graph. The graph defaults to 3 lines and the I-bars. The 3 lines are sales and earnings, green and blue, which you saw in the core, and a new line, which is pink, which is pre-tax profit. The I-bars are still in black, and they're still up and down lines with a horizontal line at the top and the bottom that look kind of like the letter I. I'm also suggesting that in the legend, as a beginner, you click the last 2 choices, sales detailed estimates and EPS detailed estimates. Not every company will have extension dots, but when they do, you'll get some idea of where Morningstar thinks these final dots should end up for the next 1, 2, or even 3 years. They're great aids to making your judgment. Here's the bottom of tab 1 on the SSG Plus. And notice that instead of 2 different places to put in your future forecast sales growth and future forecast earnings growth, notice that you have 2 blocks and they're in one place. I'm using the same judgments because this is the same SSG that we did in the first class. We estimated sales at 6% and earnings going forward at 8%. Now I also get the management evaluations, but instead of being spread over 3 tabs, three steps, they're now in a single place. And I'm getting a suggestion as to the trend of the last 5 years data, and it's color coded. When it's green, that means the trend is generally positive. When it's amber, that means that the trend is definitely stable. And when it's red, that means the trend is generally negative. Now, you gotta be careful with the data, because just because it's red does not necessarily mean it's bad. If this debt went from 15 in nice, relatively easy steps down to 3, I'm sorry, let's do that the other way. If this debt went from 3 in nice, easy steps up to 15, that would be showing debt that was increasing. It would show it's red, and it might be something that you would worry about a little bit, but at 15%, you still wouldn't be overly concerned by the debt in the company. So watch the colors, but they don't always tell the whole story. You always should look at the data behind those colors. Let's move to the top of tab 2, because now for the first time, you see a chart with all the same information plus extra stuff that was in the core SSG. You still see the last 5 years high earnings per share and the last 5 years low earnings per share. You also see the high and low prices and the earnings themselves. You see the dividend that was paid and the payout that that dividend represents. You also see the yield. Yields like interest on a savings account And a good yield for a stock in today's market is somewhere around 2.5%. That's a really decent yield. 3.5%, 4%, those are really good yields. And if you really like dividends, if you're more of a dividend player than anything else, then you might be searching for stocks that pay a higher yield. Don't just look at the dollar amount, look at what that dollar amount represents when you compare it to the stock price. That's the yield, and that's the number that you'd like to be higher if you possibly can make it higher if you're searching for better dividends. We still have a 5-year average in both columns, and we get a current PE ratio, which we had on the SSG core, and you get a 5-year average. That's nothing more than the 48 plus the 28 divided by 2. That's where that 36 comes from right here. Up at the top, a current price, and it's dated. I was preparing this particular slide on Valentine's Day or the day after, so I have an old stock right now and a 52-week high and a 52-week low. Go on with your question.
Yes, this is Marty. We have a question from the audience that says, my trend just says up or down. How do I get the graph? I thought you might want to point out
I certainly
where they
will.
could go to change that.
I certainly will. Let's take a look at the SSG Plus right here. And up on tools, you can press tools, and under tools, you're going to get some preferences. And if you'd like to change the words to colors, then if you click preferences, you'll be able to do it right there. But folks, that's one of those things that if you don't get it the first 10 times through, that's okay. I'm trying not to tell you everything you need to know in 45 minutes. I'm trying to focus on you being a beginner investor and giving you, I know that I'm giving you a lot, but believe me, I'm trying to give you the bare bones in order to make the transition from one tool to the next. Let's move to where we're at right now. Here we are at the top of tab 2 now. Notice that tab 2 has a green background to it. There's that chart we were talking about, and it does appear daunting. So let's break it down. The red stuff will change or might change day to day because the current price as you trade might change day to day, and that might affect the 52-week high and the 52-week low. The current price earnings ratio, with this blue circle on it right down here, might change day to day as the price changes day to day. But it'll be based on the trailing 12 months, the last 4 quarters, until we get a new quarter. The trailing 12 months data right here will only change once a quarter. And all the data in the rest of these columns will only change once every fiscal year. When 2024 fiscal year fell into this chart, this data right here, 2019 fell off the chart. The oldest year fell off when the new year came on, and that changed the averages. Changing these averages once a year also changes the 5-year average. Remember, it's just these two numbers added together and divided by 2. So this 5-year average only changes once a year. So a lot of this table stays the same. Red, there's possible changes daily. This blue circle down here, possible changes daily, but for most other data, it's changing only once a year. Please don't think you have to go back and rethink this chart every time you look at the SSG Plus. Again, I'm explaining on this slide what happens to these different values. And as you review this class, I think this slide becomes important. Every bit of data that I pointed out was also in the core. You're not seeing any new data. You're just seeing it displayed on a single chart rather than in 12 or 14 different steps. Take it slowly. And if you find data you don't understand in the new tool, my advice in the beginning is to ignore it. As you do more stock selection guides and begin to ask more and more questions, you'll be able to interpret more and more of the numbers. Folks, I know it's human nature to want to press all the rest of these tabs and understand them immediately. And my advice is make sure you understand these two before you move on to all of these right here. These can be great supplementary material, but for the moment, let's focus on the meat. And the meat is in these two steps right there. Now here's the next part of tab 2, and again, it looks like it's a bear. It looks like you'll never understand all these words and all these different things going on. But if you break it down, it becomes much easier. First of all, notice that there's 2 green boxes, and green is usually meant to draw your attention to what's in those boxes. What we have in the boxes is a high price 5 years from now and a selected low price that we've selected from some choices that are given to us above. Remember in the core, we said that anytime you take a PE value and multiply it by an earnings value, you get an associated price. And here was the average high multiplied by the estimated high earnings per share. This number is based on your earnings growth rate, and it gives us a forecasted possible high price 5 years from now. Here's that same formula: a low price times an estimated low earnings per share. This is the trailing 12 months number. For a growth company, the most recent 4 quarters earnings should set the worst case scenario. The company should be growing past that number in every quarter after that for the next 5 years. And these two set the floor for our earnings. And just like in the core, as a beginner, this defaults to choice A, and we're suggesting you stick with choice A. Even as an experienced SSG user, I'm still using choice A 90% or more of the time. This window opens when you click in that first green box. The high earnings number I've already indicated comes from your growth in earnings. You take the trailing 12 months earnings and grow them by the percentage that you chose, and do that for 5 years. That'll give you a new earnings forecast, and that'll be an optimistic earnings number 5 years from now. When we looked at the 5 past high PEs, we decided going forward, 32 might be a great average for the 5 PEs that are going to appear for the next 5 years. I won't know if that's accurate for 5 years, but I do feel that it's reasonable. And a PE times an earnings gives us a stock price. In this case, the high stock price. This will default, and this one will fill in, and this will automatically calculate. Make sure that when you fill in the 32, you update the study. Here's what opens when you click in the second green box. And the second green box is that low price green box. This number is the trailing 12 months number. The last 4 quarters, the floor, the worst case scenario. And this is the PE that we chose as being reasonable. Notice the tool is suggesting some other data that we might want to take and consider. The 5-year average low was 28.3, and we decided 27 going forward was going to be reasonable. A multiplication is done, and we get a worst case number 5 years from now. We like to check to see if that worst case number is close to the current price. And it's close, but it's not right on the current price. And as a beginner, that's all you're checking for. Don't try to get any fancier than that at this particular time. This defaults, this calculates, and here's what you fill in. And again, you're faced with 5 choices in this tool. You only had 3 in the core tool. Now you have 5 choices, but again, as a beginner, stick with the average, the default choice, and just hit update choices. Make it easy on yourself. When you're looking at this particular choice, you also notice that you can choose to manually update every single one of your SSGs. Manually means doing it by hand. And if you have 300 SSGs in your library, that's a lot of work. Or you can auto update all of your SSGs. And that's what I always choose to do. When I auto update the data and the prices, I want to press one button for all of them, not an individual button for each one. If I have 1 or 2 exceptions that I don't want to update, on an exception, I can always change this choice for one time and then move it back to auto update after I save that one-time exception. But as a beginner, I said make it easy. Auto update everything. Low prices will always reflect the most recent 4 quarters. This price, worst case scenario, trailing 12 months, will always reflect the most recent 4 quarters when you auto update. Now, once you've filled in the 2 PE judgments, just like on the core, we get a price, and if you're choosing choice A second price. There's a risk analysis button on the right over here where you can see what these choices give you in terms of risk. And if you want to see the same picture that you saw in the core, you can press this button right here, which would show or hide the gain-loss chart. When you press that button, you get these pictures. And again, you've seen them in the core. The transition should be easy, folks. Everything I've pointed out has been in the core. One last judgment has to be made if the company pays a dividend. And you'll remember that we decided that a 35% payout ratio, which was the default, is okay to use. If you want to adjust that up or down, that's okay to do as well. But there are very few times where you have to adjust this number more than 1 or 2 percentage points either way. And an adjustment of 1 or 2 percentage points makes a very minor change in our most important numbers, which are sitting at the bottom of this SSG. Here's the only new thing coming from the SSG Plus, and that's a second return. This is the return, the compound annual return. That's what we saw in core. 10.3% coming from price appreciation, 1.1% coming from dividend, 11.4% total return based on our judgments. Here's a second return, and it's a return that instead of being based on the high PE, like this one was, that was 32 for this study, this is based on the average PE. And the average PE for this study was 29.5, I think. It's less than this return, and we give this return a name. It's called the potential average return because it's based on the average PE value. We like to characterize the results of the SSG as saying this stock is likely to return somewhere between around 9.5% to around 11.5% and gives us a range. When you characterize it like that, you begin to understand that some of your other sources might be helpful in validating what you've done for your judgments. Here's my advice to novice investors, to folks that are just beginning to use the better investing tools. Use the core until you understand the vocabulary. Make absolutely certain you understand all the vocabulary before you move to the plus. Save every one of your core studies. If it's lousy or if it's great, save it. And add a note when you save it so you understand what you were doing and what you were thinking and what it was for when you actually saved it. Then begin to convert them one by one, pressing the SSG Plus button from the core saved study. Whenever you have a question, go in reverse. Go back to core. And remember, you have all those education tabs in core to reference when you have a question. Once you think you're understanding what you're supposed to do, then go back to plus again and continue. Set a goal that's reasonable for your learning style, for your pace of learning, and do a certain number of SSGs a week. It might only be 1 or 2. It might be 5 or 6. But folks, if you don't do at least 1 or 2 a week for the next 6 or 8 weeks, all of what we're talking about is going to leave. Stay focused in the beginning on well-behaved companies. That means their lines for sales and earnings and pre-tax profit are up, they're straight, and they're parallel. Don't worry about finding buys immediately. Worry about doing good studies. And refrain from chasing stocks that have lines on the visual analysis that look like roller coasters. That's a task for a future you. Work with a friend or with a group of friends. Ask questions, listen carefully. Visit some model clubs. Join a model club if you have the time, or ask if you can be referred to clubs that are near where you live or that are virtual and online. The more people you can involve in your decision making, the better your SSGs are going to become. Let's go live to the SSG Plus now and see if we can answer some questions about this particular tool. And let me get to that tool first of all before we start asking questions, okay? And I'm going to call up Zoetis. Notice when I call it up from the home page, because I'm in core, I get a core. If I click 2+, then I get a plus. And I get a blank copy of Zoetis. If I hit quick navigation and put Zoetis down here under search saved studies, I immediately find the study that we created for the class that we're taking right now. And if I click on it, it opens up. And there it is with our judgments. Mark, Marty, Herb, any questions in the back room that we can talk about?
Yeah, the one question is, what is the yellow on the total return? I sometimes see red right hand side previous slide.
I'm not on slides now. I'm on the tool, Herb. But is it yellow right here?
On the total return, what's it yellow on the total return telling me? Sometimes I see red.
I'm not sure what the asker is asking. Maybe they can come online and talk and ask that question in a different way.
Okay, Rosemary.
I think if you move to the valuation tab, you might see the question in the scroll down.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, okay.
Are we looking over here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Remember my advice, beginners? If you see a number or something on the SSG Plus that you don't understand, what are you supposed to do? Ignore it. So for the moment, as you're learning how to transition, I would ignore that. Now, if that question is coming from somebody that has experience, maybe more experience than a true beginner, then I'm going to answer it, but I don't want to confuse my novices with more information than they really need to make the transition. amber, and that's an amber color they call it, or a yellow color if you want, is looking at total return that might be acceptable, but not up to 15%. When it turns red, that might be indicating return that's not acceptable for the company. It might be indicating return that would indicate you might want to consider selling the stock. But beginners, please, for the moment, ignore the colors that might appear in the summary. That's portfolio management, and we haven't even come close to getting there yet. Focus on transitioning from being a great core user to an acceptable SSG Plus user, and then focus on doing enough SSG Plus SSGs so that you become at least a good SSG Plus user before you start to expand your knowledge and look at some of the other information that's available. There is so much, folks. We could take 3 days talking about this tool. I like to compare it to Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. I'm sure that many of you use Word, and I'm sure that many of you understand that there are countless buttons and combinations and pull-down menus that you never use and never need to use to turn out a pretty decent Word document. The same thing is true about the SSG Plus. There's all kinds of information that you can add to your knowledge base, but you don't need it all to turn out a pretty decent SSG for a study that you're trying to pull together. Is there another question?
I think we're pretty much caught up, Ken.
Okay. What I want to do one more time now is I want to compare Zoetis to some of our other documents that we've used for research. So I'm going to start by going to the value line page and pulling back up that Zoetis value line sheet. What I'd like to do now is direct your attention to the upper left-hand corner of the value line sheet over here where it says projections. Do you remember the projections that we had, that we made in the SSG Plus? I think we said somewhere in the neighborhood of 9.5 to maybe 11%, maybe 11.5%. I'm looking at the value line projections for the next 3 to 5 years. And my set of projections on my SSG fits very nicely into value lines range of projections. That gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's validation for what's going on my SSG. Let's look at manifest investing for Zoetis. Manifest suggests that a good par value is 7.4%. We've come up with 9.5. And folks, if you're learning about numbers not as a chemist or an engineer or a math teacher, the way I was trained, then you're also learning about numbers and their tolerances. Think about doing a stock selection guide that didn't have nice lines with single numbers attached, but were done by using crayons, and every number had a plus or minus attached to it. That's really the same way that our values are in our concluding statement. When I read 9.5% par, remember that's potential average return. I'm really reading 7 to 11, 7.5 to 10.5, maybe 8 to 10. And when I'm reading Mark's par number of 7.4, which is coming, remember, from Y charts. Remember, we talked about that in the first class. I'm also reading a tolerance attached to that par. I'm not reading 7.4. I'm really reading maybe 6 to 9 or something in that general range. And I'm saying to myself, my par number and Mark's number, which is also labeled par, which is also based on an average PE value, I'm saying that the two numbers are close enough to be regarded as the same value. In other words, manifest's number coming from Y charts is also validating my study.
Yeah, Ken,
When I
I
can
might
get
just,
let me finish one
yeah,
thought,
go
Mark.
ahead, go ahead.
When I can get validation from value line and from manifest, I'm beginning to feel that I have a study that's worthwhile. Now, I might want to temper my study just a little bit. If I think manifest is right on, I might want to expand my study just a little if I feel value line's just right on. But right now, I'm feeling pretty comfortable with the study that I did. Mark, go on.
Yeah, so what the way I would frame this, you basically did a study and you decided that Zoetis appears to have a 9 or 10% type return potential. What this is the answer to the question is it's not Mark's number. And when we say Y charts, let's elaborate on that just a tiny bit. You're basically looking at a consensus opinion. And that opinion could be coming from anywhere from 1 to 50 professional analysts. When Ken says Y chart's a number, that's actually what he's referring to. We look at the consensus of a bunch of different experts. Does that mean that the experts are always right? Oh, absolutely not. But in this case, the consensus opinion, it'd be as if you sat the 8 analysts who cover this company around your dining room table, and they all did their own SSGs and come up with an average number. So that gives it a little bit of context. And that's true for most of the numbers on this page. It's a consensus opinion, but it is still just an opinion, hopefully a reasonable opinion, Ken.
Well, I've found it to be extremely reasonable. And folks, it's not too often you get to question the guy that put the numbers together for the website that you're looking at. And Mark doesn't pick the numbers out of thin air. He uses many, many, many different sources based on Y charts data. But like he said, lots of different numbers coming from lots of different people and lots of different places. Any other questions? Well, this class then is going to be complete. We're going to follow the class now at 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, we're going to begin to talk about portfolios. We're going to first of all explain how to create portfolios, both in the tool, the SSG tool from Better Investing, and the Manifest tool. We're going to learn how to create those portfolios, and then we're going to begin to look at some portfolios that exist and try to show you how you can use your tools to maybe decide on what should be going on with portfolio management. Thanks a lot, folks. We'll be back at 2. If you're not registered and would like to register, go to the Manifest Investing website under Events and register for Class 3, or go to betterinvesting.org and look for either my chapter, if you're part of the Mid-Michigan chapter, or look for the Mid-Michigan chapter under Other Chapters, if you're not from the Mid-Michigan chapter, and you'll find registration links on our chapter's webpage. And again, it's class 3, and it'll be at 2 Eastern time, which is just a little bit more than an hour away. Thanks for coming, and we are going to run help sessions in 2 or 3 weeks. They will be basically open mic sessions after you've had a chance to play with these tools. Usually that generates a whole bunch of questions. Save your questions, and when we run open mic, we'll try to clear up every single question that you have, and we'll try to give guidance and help along the way. If you have something that just can't wait, you do have our email addresses, and don't be shy in sending either Mark or myself a question. Myself about better investing questions, and Mark especially about manifest investing questions. Thanks for coming, folks, and we'll talk to most of you again in an hour. Mark, go on.
Do I get to talk about Gene Hackman and Hoosiers before the next session?
You can, yes, Mark, do that right now, because I think it's a wonderful thing to talk about.
Well, I just sit here thinking about, putting this in context. It's been a long time since I started with the investment club movement. And I actually went and dug out, I'll have to show it to you, Ken, my original stock selection guides from 1993. And it really helped me remember that moment in time. And we should do a poll. How many of you out there are fans of Gene Hackman? And I think the answer would come back 95% to 100. And I'm referring specifically to the movie Hoosiers. And Ken has thrown a pretty good amount of stuff here, but excellent job, Ken, on actually laying this stuff out. And what I'm referring to is there's a classic scene in the movie Hoosiers. It's a basketball movie, but this group of small, wide-eyed youngsters are walking into a huge basketball stadium in Indianapolis, and Gene Hackman, as the coach, has them measure the distance from the basket to the free throw line and confirm that it's just like home. And then he says, well, measure how far is that rim off the floor? And that turns out to be 10 feet. He says, that's just like home, just like that rim, hanging on the barn back in Hickory. And what Ken has done here is basically shared a very similar thing of what the challenge of investing comes down to is understanding that it matters how a company is growing, what's the growth rate, how's the profitability, what's the PE, and really what George Nicholson and Ken Kavula now have given you is an emphasis on what really matters, what's important, what needs to be measured again and again. And then I think the next session is basically going to reinforce that with not only how do you discover opportunities, but how do you monitor them in a portfolio? So again, this notion of the coach helping these young men understand that, yeah, it's a massive basketball arena, but it's just like home is an important concept, and it takes me back. So thank you, Ken.
Appreciate that, Mark. And folks, thanks for coming, and we'll talk to everybody again at 2 o'clock Eastern time. Good afternoon.